Okay, Kevin, teach us.
Can we do this as a dedication today for Little Nishmat? Gidon Lisa's mom passed away last week in Israel, and they're sitting Shiva at the moment. I don't know the Hebrew name. I don't really speak to Gidon, but the name was Zelda, Gidon's mom.
Sure,
So,
sure. You'll send if you're still connected to him. You'll send the link of the share to
yes.
him. I do know Gidon from Mahasha and through Ian and Hazel Smolovitz, and I'm sure all of us just wish Gidon and his family long life, and I hope this is an aliyah for her neshama. I'm really, really sorry for his loss. Thank you, Kevin, for bringing it to our attention. Before we start the Gemara share, do you want to share an idea or two with us?
Yeah, just a quick idea. So, in last week's Parsha, Beshalach, at the end of the Parsha, it talks about wiping out Amalek. It's a mitzvah to do so. And in the actual war with Amalek, Moshe was leading the troops, so to speak, Jewish people. And when he raised his hands, they were strong and they were victorious. But when he lowered his hands, they were not. And this is quite strange. I mean, if Moshe was there, surely that didn't need him to raise his hands. And I mean, he would have been in his foot would have helped them win, regardless of raising his hands or not. So what it says here in the parsha, it says basically when he raised his hands, he raised them to Shamayim, to Hashem, and had faith in Emunah Hashem that He would help them be victorious. So that's quite a good analogy and very topical that Hashem provides miracles, especially in the onslaught of these uh, what Israel's experienced the last year, attacks and missiles, and it's nothing short of miraculous, and it only came from Hashem's protection, these miracles. So I just thought I'd give it a modern take on it.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's important to bear in mind, especially during this time, that it's not about the IDF, it's not about Trump, it's not about anybody other than the fact that Hashem uses agents to protect us, and if we raise our heads towards davening to Hashem, and then these agents will work on our behalf. Otherwise, they will not be effectual or even maybe even be detrimental. Um, so it's something we need to bear in mind, especially today. It's even more relevant today. So thank you, Kev. You've got a very nice background. I must actually learn how to
You
put.
see the sea.
I need to. No, I see the sea. I'm saying you've all got lovely backgrounds, and I need to work on it. Brendan also. He looks like he's in a hospital bed, but um, it's not a problem. So we're gonna get started. Just very, very quickly, guys. If you remember last time,
But I forgot the background.
okay, guys, let we the second Mishnah that we dealt with was it basically didn't have to do with the murder victim or the alleged murderer being um, accountable in that time and place. Specifically, it was about the Adam Zomimim's integrity being put into question. So, in other words, if a second pair of witnesses said to the first set that you couldn't have seen the murder victim get killed at this particular time and place because the murder victim was with us somewhere else, they don't get the reciprocal death penalty. The same with the alleged murderer. It's only when the witnesses themselves are testified against by the second set of witnesses about the fact that they couldn't have, in fact, viewed it, not that either the victim or the perpetrator wasn't there because they were with the second set of witnesses. Only then can we apply the reciprocal penalty. It also has to be at the time between the verdict and carrying out the sentence. Then the second part that we learned in the Mishnah was the fact that Rabbi Yehuda said, look, at the end of the day. It was first brought by the Mishnah. There was a second portion to it which said, look, you've got multiple witnesses that are being refuted by the second set, and therefore, even if this reoccurs multiple times, all of those who are discredited are executed as the conspiring witnesses. So the testimony of the two witnesses that the other 100 set were with them or somewhere else is believed to be established at all 100 sets of Zomimim. So basically, according to the Tanna Kamma, we believe the second set of witnesses no matter how long this pattern reoccurs. And Gavin brought up it's highly suspicious, as did Rabbi Yehuda and all of us, that, clearly if there's a second group, it's unlikely that every group that claimed to have witnessed the crime happened to be elsewhere in the company of the discrediting witnesses. So their testimony is rejected. The thing that we wanted to ask is, why are the first set of witnesses executed? Either they should all be executed because we have to follow a certain process of believing the second set of witnesses. Alternatively, they're all exonerated because something's fishy, that the second set, no matter how many witnesses came and said they saw the event, they were testifying that the first set of witnesses were with them at another location. So that's where we dealt with last. And we were then saying, well, where's this been established? And we were discussing different pasukim like Devarim chapter 19 verse 18, and so listen, it doesn't matter when we go back to the beginning of the Mishnah about whether the alleged victim or the perpetrator was there. Well, second set of witnesses says the victim was with them somewhere else at that time, and therefore he couldn't have been killed at that particular time and place, or the murderer was with the second set of witnesses somewhere else. The only time we establish that Eidim Zomimim get the reciprocal penalty is if they are established as being in a different location with the second set of witnesses according to the testimony of the second set of witnesses. And how do we know this? It says, according to Ravada, because the Chumash says, and behold, the witness is a false witness. He has testified falsely against his brother, and until the persons of the witnesses have been established as false. So the specificity here says that the testimony, it's not about the testimony being challenged. The minute you've got different viewpoints of how the facts transpired, the second set of witnesses and the first set of witnesses cancel each other out. It's only when the reputation of the first set of witnesses is called into question because they couldn't have viewed the event that we established the reciprocal penalty. But that starts out in Deuteronomy chapter 19 verse 18, way before we shall get to that punishment. You shall do to him as he intended to do to his brother. So that was Rav Ada who used that pasuk. There was a school of Yishmael, you remember, taught that the principle was described by the testimony of the Zomim. So it basically says, if you go a few verses before, it says in Deuteronomy Devarim chapter 19 verse 16. So we basically go from 16, 17, 18, 19 all the way to about 23 where it deals with these Eidim Zomim. But according to the school of Yishmael, it says, look, to testify against the victim, something removed from reality. What do you mean? It's an expression implying that hazama is not accomplished until the persons of the witnesses are removed from the scene of the alleged crime by the testimony of the second set. So all that we learn from Rav Yishmael's school is that their testimony about what they saw and when, they have to be removed from the scene of the crime by a second set in order to apply that punishment. Now, then we went into this issue, guys, with Rava. I don't know if you can put yourself on mute because I'm hearing my own voice bounce back unless there's a question. Sorry, guys. I don't know why. I don't know why that is. And what we said was, Rava said if two witnesses came to court and said, look, in the east wing of the palace, that person killed someone. And two other witnesses came and said, but You were with us in the west wing of the palace at the time of the alleged crime. So, as we said, and Gavin gave us some good points, we see whether if while standing in the west wing of the palace, one can see the east wing. If you can, there's not a problem. They're not Eidim Zomamim. It's you can view the crime. If you can't, then them saying that they saw the crime in the east wing isn't possible from the west wing, and then we apply the reciprocal punishment of the death penalty because that's what they wanted to do, have this innocent victim killed. And the Gemara said, as did Gavin, well, this is a little obvious. What are we trying to prove here? And the thing of it is that Arthur and Gavin have gone AWOL for a second. I'll watch everything. I can't hear, somebody's mumbling. Arthur's back, Gavin's back. Okay. E.T.
I
fine.
wasn't gone. Damon, if I'm trying to get something from my bag, my head's down, it's the lighting. I'm sitting
no,
down.
that's fine.
I'm running around the kitchen cooking food for my family.
No, that's
So,
fine. Listen, I wouldn't want to
I'm
get
working for that.
Nadine and food. All right. I'm happy to. Neither
Or
would you.
me and food.
Yeah. Well, you and food. Yeah. Gav, no, that's fine. As long as you're feeling all right. It's more like how you're feeling because you didn't sound well. All right. So, Gavin said, okay, so it was teaching us the obvious. So, with Rava, like, what's the story? And what we said is, look, you might think that we basically have the possibility that the witnesses maybe have unusually strong eyesight, enabling them to see across the palace, even if most people couldn't, and therefore we should not rule them to be Eidim Zomamim and have them killed. And Rava informs us that we have to take the average probability of what one can see, and that would be the testing, the litmus test about whether the Eidim Zomamim will get the reciprocal penalty or not. Now you say, well, why be so hard on the Eidim Zomamim? The answer is, why not? They're going to get somebody killed. So as we mentioned to Lance last time, because he asked some good questions as well, is at the end of the day, Lance, a person needs skin in the game. So, there was the option of saying that the Eidim Zomamim get killed. There was a slightly different commentary by Tosfot and the Ritva that said, look, before these witnesses are even accepted, they have to give testimony. And the fact that they say, look, they can see it, is established at that stage, and they wouldn't have been almost sworn in as witnesses in the first place, Lance, in order to get killed as Eidim Zomamim. Because if it was dealing with the average eyesight of a witness, and here they said they could see it, quite clearly, in any death penalty case, we don't want a death penalty to happen, so we question the witnesses with a myriad of minutiae of detail to try and catch them out within the court case, but even before, so as not to waste the court's time. So according to the Ritva and Tosfot, the case wouldn't have even happened and gotten to that stage. But say they slipped through the cracks and they would have condemned an innocent person to death. We say to them that you get the reciprocal death penalty. Now, what if they could see that far? Well, the thing of it is, we don't actually want to put a Jew to death, never mind two Jews. So this is why the Ritva and Tosfot is saying, listen, be that careful. Because we're saying, listen, are you sure you want to put this Jew to death? Because we're going to be looking at averages here. And if you're caught out, even if you might have the eyesight of Clark Kent, the thing of it is, it's going to backfire against you. So rather don't testify because we're taking averages. Then there was a terrible analogy I used for a second thing, and that is we say, all right, so what happens if, according to Rava, there was this case in Surah on Sunday morning, that person killed someone, and two others came and said, on Sunday evening, you were with us in Nahadia. So what do? We see whether from morning to evening, one can travel from Surah to Nahadia, and if you can, then they're not Eidim Zomamim because such a feat is possible. And then we say, but this is obvious, like why bring it up? And the reality is, you bring it up because they might have said, listen, we've got an unusually fast, swift camel, and can make the trip in such a short time, and therefore we shouldn't be held to a normal standard. I tried to modernize the example and I failed miserably, which Gavin well pointed out and said, well, Dave, how can you take a Maserati compared to a second-hand Toyota? And he's right, because then the Maserati can go at Mach 1, and my second-hand Toyota, I'm happy if the gearbox works. So it's not the greatest analogy. Sometimes you shouldn't modernize it. So we're talking the same species. There's not a range at which it can do a supersonic donkey versus a average speed of a donkey. So my analogy was poor. But the bottom line is we go on what is average for an animal to be able to achieve from point A to B, and we go with the average so as not to innocently kill a victim, and that the Adam Zimmerman can't plot against somebody because they'll get the reciprocal penalty. That's where we ended up last time. Do you appreciate the summary, guys? Is it helpful at all? Okay. So,
Yeah, very, very useful. Thank you, boys.
all right, and yeah, so now we're going to be dealing with a separate issue of Rava. Now, the issue that's come into play is what happens, and I just want to give you a bit of background. The Gemara, when I first read it, the Gemara wasn't confusing. I was confused. As it starts to differentiate between when a second set of witnesses testify, sorry, the first set of witnesses turn around and say, we witnessed this at such and such a time and date, etc. And there was a second set said you couldn't have. But the person actually committed the crime. So what do we do? Do we give them the reciprocal penalty or we don't give them the reciprocal penalty? Now, one of the statements, as you know, of Rava, let's just look at the average. So the Gemara is going to bring 2 points that kind of do confuse when you first read it. It's a case where you don't know the timeline of when they testified. In other words, the person testified like on a Sunday that this person was guilty and they were only sentenced on a Monday. So you say, well, then clearly they try to make somebody guilty that was not guilty. But if they said they witnessed the sentencing on a Sunday, but they only came forward as witnesses on a Thursday, and say, guys, bear in mind on Sunday we saw this person was sentenced to that crime. Then the thing of it is the Gemara is trying to trap you. It's saying, but what actually took place happened after they say it did, and therefore it didn't occur at that time where they said it took place, so they should get the reciprocal penalty because at that point the person was innocent. So that's but what your overlying principle should be, because sometimes the Gemara wants to teach you how to think, but they don't realize all 6 of us are like kind of sickly sometimes, so we're not always with it. So the bottom line that I want you to remember is it doesn't matter when they said it took place. What matters when they testify. So if they're testifying on a Thursday that a person was guilty on a Sunday, but he wasn't guilty on a Sunday, he was only convicted on a Monday, but they came on the Thursday later that week, the guilt of the individual still happened when? Before they testified, and therefore they're convicting as somebody that's guilty anyway. Then they don't get the reciprocal penalty. Okay? So it goes for capital cases and it goes for monetary cases and fines. That's the principle. In other words, don't get confused about Sunday, Monday, Tuesdays, Thursdays. It's going to mess you up. Just bear in mind a principle. I'm sorry to do this. I might have taken the smack out of the Gemara, meaning taken away the novelty, but sometimes the novelty factor is superseded by confusion. So in other words, always bear in mind when the witnesses gave the testimony, and if they gave the testimony after the defendant was guilty, but if they gave the testimony after the defendant was guilty, but it was still after they said when the event took place. When they gave the testimony, the person was guilty, so they don't get the reciprocal penalty. If the person is innocent, then they get the reciprocal penalty, even if it turns out the person's guilty. Do you see what I'm coming at here in terms of the confusion level that the Gemara is going to bring? Or not yet? Must I go through it? I'll go through it. All right, let me go through it. All right, so the Gemara says, Rava said in yet another case, if two witnesses came and said, on Sunday that person killed someone, and two other witnesses came and said, you were with us on Sunday at another location and could not have seen the killing. However, on Monday that person killed somebody, thus the second set of witnesses agrees that the accused deserves to be executed. So the second set even agrees that this person was a murderer, but they're disputing that the first set actually witnessed the killing of someone on a Sunday when it transpired on a Monday. Moreover, even if they said on the previous Friday that person killed somebody, so that indeed deserved the death penalty at the time the first witnesses testified falsely against him, they, the first set of witnesses, are nevertheless executed as Zomamim witnesses. Why? Because at the time they testified falsely, the person they accused was not subject to execution. Although indeed he was a murderer, he had not yet been convicted and sentenced in court. His subsequent conviction and sentence to death does not exempt them from the death sentence they deserve for testifying falsely against him. So the Gemara is trying to bring up three different points. The first thing that it's trying to bring up is that it doesn't matter if the second set and the first set are in agreement that this defendant is actually guilty of murder. That's the first thing it's trying to establish. The second set thing it's trying to establish is, what's it got to do with the case if a murder happened on Sunday versus the previous Friday? The Gemara is trying to confuse you, because you might have said, listen, the reason why they get the reciprocal death penalty is because they said the event occurred on Sunday. But in fact, the murder occurred on Monday. And therefore, they deserved the reciprocal death penalty because they said it happened before it happened. Okay. Then the Gemara turns around. I'm going to be testing you guys. I haven't finished, Lance. Let me finish the sentence. So the first thing the Gemara wants to establish is, maybe you think the Adam Zomamim deserve the reciprocal death penalty because they said it happened on a Sunday. It's proof they didn't. So the murder happens on a Monday. Okay, so therefore they might get executed because they say this person was guilty before they were guilty. So the Gemara could say that maybe you would think that's the reason. Then they say, okay, so what happened if it happened on the previous Friday? In other words, person didn't murder on a Sunday because they were caught out as Adam Zomamim. But actually the previous Friday they did commit a murder. So then they maybe should be off of getting the reciprocal death penalty because all they did is said a murder took place, and they said it a few days later to when it happened, but a murder did take place. And the Gemara is saying it has nothing to do with it. Just because this person murdered, and even the second set of witnesses agree, the person was not convicted. And yet it's about conviction of the set. And the only time they don't get, I'm just going to circumvent the Gemara here, the only time the Adam Zomamim don't get killed is if this person was convicted as being a murderer, and basically the Adam Zomamim, it might have happened in a previous court or whatever the case, turned around. They didn't know, they just knew this guy was no good. They knew he was no good, and it was only a matter of time before they were. Let me give you a scenario, right? Elk's a mafia guy, and they're worried because they owe a lot of money in debt that this person's going to have them killed. So they figure, look, they don't have the money to pay back, so they're going to accuse him of a crime of murder because they know he's no good. It's only a matter of time before the evidence comes that he kills them or somebody else, and they don't want to die. So it so happened they were right. He did kill. He killed on the previous Friday. So why should they get the reciprocal death penalty? Because they didn't witness the killing. And therefore, that was the case. The only time they don't get the reciprocal death penalty is if he was sentenced, unbeknownst to the Adam Zomamim, about a murder that had committed, and therefore, since he was sentenced but the verdict wasn't carried out, you're testifying against dead person. And we learned in Sanhedrin in 78a that if with your own hands you kill somebody that's terminal, you don't get killed for murder because it's dead man walking. And we learned that case also if somebody's sentenced to death. So there's an issue in terms of a treifa. There's also an issue in terms of if a person is sentenced to death by the Beis Din. As far as that's concerned, if you even kill somebody with your own hands and don't say the court did it, but this person was sentenced to die or going to die, have you killed, or they've got let me put it this way rather, they've got a legal presumption that they're going to die, guaranteed. You don't get the reciprocal death penalty or even a direct penalty because you've killed a dead person. So before we go into this matter a bit more detail, and we've got a similar thing with theft, Lance had a question.
Okay, so Damon, one of the big things about Eddie Zimmerman is that they're trying to undermine the court. But in this case, they weren't undermining the court. The guy was guilty of murder. The guy got a death sentence, and yet the Zimmerman was still getting a death sentence. It just doesn't seem quite fair, like because they
Okay,
weren't undermining the court.
but that's exactly you. For your reason, they are undermining the court, and that's exactly why they get the death sentence. Let me just tell you that Lance's question is good. He said it seems unfair because they're not undermining the court, so it seems a bit harsh. In other words, Lance, let me see if I understand you correct. This guy's a murderer anyway. So why should they get the reciprocal penalty if the guy turns out to be not no good, rotten murderer anywhere? Is that what you're asking, bottom line?
Yeah, pretty much. Because they weren't undermining the court. The guy was a murderer.
But that's why they're getting the death penalty, only because they undermined the court. Meaning, even the second set of witnesses that say to the Adams woman, sorry guys, you weren't there to witness it in Sandton City. You were with us in Cape Town. You didn't actually witness the murder. But we agree with you, this oak's no good. This guy's no good. He turned out to be a killer. We know why you testified. You were probably nervous that he'd end up killing you guys, and we get why you did it. We get it. And this guy's no good. And Lance, it sounds like Lance has got a strong question. The Gemara said, but the truth of it is they were going to put an innocent person to death by manipulating the court system because they were not there to witness the defendant murder a person. And since they were not there, they tried to use the court process and corrupt it in order to get him killed by the court. And therefore, their corruption of the court system is what got them killed. Because the whole process of being accepted as a witness is that you need skin in the game to say that if you're caught out trying to put somebody to death or any crime, what you intended to do to them is done to you. And if your timing was off, you still put an innocent person to death. And the rationale of the court is, if you just waited for us to have passed a verdict, even if the sentence wasn't carried out, you wouldn't have actually corrupted the court system, because you would have testified against somebody that was legally dead anyway. So we wouldn't have given you the reciprocal penalty. But you didn't view the murder, and you were quite happy that the person who you know didn't murder anybody that you witnessed was to be put to death, whether or not they were a good person or not. You manufactured evidence in order to get a person killed, and therefore the rules of Adams Zimmerman apply. It is unfortunate for you that it didn't work out for you, and this guy was no good, but it's irrelevant. You can't use the court system to put somebody that's innocent to death. And what's the definition, Lance, of innocent according to the court? If you say you witnessed a murder and no such murder took place, there's an innocence in that case you're testifying against. It might be this guy's a serial killer, but you didn't see him murder that person. So you're trying to get this person convicted on a crime he did not commit. And that's the court's point. Do you get it? So the
question on the dead man walking.
yeah.
So, if somebody kills somebody that's like sentenced to death or has got a critical illness, they're not punished. But won't they be like punished later on, like maybe in their next life?
Yes, Brendan's bringing up a good point, is that we're not quite sure how it works in the next world, but all I can tell you is the writing principle is if you think you've gotten away with it on a technicality in this world, technically, in many cases, you haven't, because even if the Sanhedrin can't apply a direct death penalty, they give the person the barley treatment. Their stomach shrinks, no food, no water, give them barley and a lot of water. Shaboom. So the Sanhedrin didn't do it, the barley did it. Then the second aspect is in cases where that didn't apply, where there was the barley treatment and the person got off, Hashem has held them spiritually totally responsible. And in fact, if they got the death penalty, that would work if they were really sorry for the act as a kapora, an atonement for that sin, and it would hold them in good stead in the next world as having paid the price for their sin, providing they were sorry. In other words, there was a serial killer that said if he could have his time again, like you have Ted Bundy's that said if he could kill everybody, he would do it any chance he got. That's not kapora. All the death penalty does is give the person the opportunity to use it where they're giving their life for a kapora, but they must genuinely regret it and be willing to die for the fact of measure for measure. They took a life, they're prepared to give their life as a mental and emotional acknowledgement of their guilt. If they don't use the opportunity, their death alone won't atone for them. They will just stop hurting other people. So all I'm saying is that the Gemara does mention this case of, hang on, so you said it occurred on a Sunday. This person actually killed on a Monday. That's the first thing the Gemara brings, Lance. So therefore, you're proper guilty because he only committed a crime on a Monday. When you said it was a Sunday, he was innocent. So why should they get the reciprocal death penalty? Well, the crime didn't happen yet. So then you want to say, well, then what happens if we say this person committed a murder on the previous Friday, but you didn't know, and you said he did it on the Monday? Well, you should get off, because even then, more so, he's not convicted, but he's certainly a murderer. So they shouldn't get the reciprocal death penalty. And the Gemara says the first thing that you should understand is that the Eidim Zomimim testified on the Thursday. So whether you want to make a case stronger by using the term after they said the event took place, he turned out being a murderer, or before, it doesn't make a difference. Because if the testimony was done on the Thursday, as long as the murder took place before, if there was a conviction from the court, then Lance, they wouldn't have corrupted the justice system, even if they lied, because this person was already sentenced to death, and therefore you can't die for killing a dead man. But if there was no sentencing, even if there was a committed murder, but the court hasn't convicted the person, you're killing an innocent person because you have no place, firstly, testifying to a false event that could get somebody killed. But more than that, because the Sanhedrin worked so hard to get people off the death penalty, they would use every technical aspect possible, including the fact that Eidim Zomimim might come up, to get this person off, and that if he was a person that committed murder but maybe didn't get a warning about that it would incur a death sentence, and according to certain opinions, the exact right death sentence, and it was indirect. Whatever the Beis Din could have done, even if the crime of murder took place, to get the person off a direct killing by the Sanhedrin, they would have done so. And your testimony would have got this person killed. We don't know for sure this person would have gotten convicted. We know he murdered. There's a difference. But even if it would have got convicted, the point of it is he didn't deserve to die with false testimony because it corrupts the court system. Does everybody understand? All right. And we're not going to go through penalty and fine and how this thing plays out there. We'll do that for tomorrow. We're ending 4 minutes early. I hope you don't mind, guys.
Okay. Just one thing, Damon.
Yeah.
Damon, I take it that psychics did not do well in this thing. Because if they get the date wrong, they're gone.
The one thing I've never understood about psychics or sidekicks is why they never took out lottery tickets if their skills are so good.
Well, you know, I'm just saying, he died, he killed him on Friday. Damn it, I'm out. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Shut,
What's
buddy.
the
I see
view?
it.
Brendan?
What's the view? I'll make it quick. What's the view if somebody's critical ill in bed and they ask for like a merciful release? What's that viewpoint?
Euthanasia is a whole different topic on its own, is that you can't
Oh,
accelerate somebody's death. That's for sure.
okay.
It's like if somebody's even destined to die, but you accelerate their death, you're culpable for murder. So there's a difference between somebody sentenced to death by the court or somebody sent that's terminal illness. And there was
Oh, I see. Okay.
an explanation of Schottenstein how gave me, you remember, Gavin? But amazed versus a Treifer. But I don't want to confuse all you guys. Let's just keep it simple. It's just when we did Sanhedrin, I decided to bring it up as a spanner in the works. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.